Dungeons & Dragons provides a great platform to tell stories about the undead, and what creature captures the imagination the most when it comes to walking corpses? It is of course the humble zombie. In this video we are going to design some homebrew creatures along with some variant rules that you can use in your D&D campaign. If you want to create your own zombie plague, use zombie variants that are a real threat on the battlefield right up to higher tier play, or to set a game in a post-apocalyptic zombie-filled wasteland, then this video is for you. Even though we are going to use some of their stat blocks as a jumping off point, we aren't going to go through any of the official undead creatures from the monster manual in great detail in this video. If you want to see my assessment of zombies and skeletons and other monster manual official creatures, check out the video in the corner of the screen now, because in this video we are going to focus entirely on homebrew. Alright, let's begin with the basic premise of zombies that we don't actually have in official D&D 5th edition rules, and that is that zombies in fantasy media can create other zombies. In the game fantasy we are trying to design, inspired by the kinds of zombies we see on TV or in the cinema, the undead aren't just the mindless minions of a lich or necromancer. They are a plague, able to spread and infect others. So let's have a think through how that could work in D&D. We have two options. It could be created as a disease, or it could be created as a curse. Given that I'm basing this design more on the pseudo-scientific interpretations of zombies we see in a lot of modern media, I'm going to go with the disease option rather than a curse. And this is what I've come up with. I've called this disease the Nox Virus, Nox meaning night or darkness in Latin, and as a happy coincidence that also sounds like the Nox Virus, spelled K-N-O-X, from the Project Zomboid game. Of course that one is named after Knox County, Tennessee, not the Latin root word. Now, my first draft of the virus was actually incredibly simple, just 3 or 4 sentences. To the effect of, you get infected, you get some poison and exhaustion, then after a certain number of hours you die and come back as a zombie. Now, that version of a virus would satisfy our needs for this experiment and design, but it's a bit dull. Especially if it's a player character who has been infected, and you're going to roleplay through the infection process. You might want a few more levels to it. So this is what I have, and the disease progresses in stages. I'll read this through as is. The Nox virus is a virulent disease transferred through contact with bodily fluids. It is known to affect a range of creatures, though it cannot spread to constructs, elementals, or other forms of undead. Afflicted creatures suffer from worsening symptoms over a number of hours before dying and eventually rising as a Nox zombie. Infection progression. Nox virus symptoms get rapidly worse as time goes on, and infection can be fatal within just a few hours. The progression of the virus is characterized by 5 stages. A die roll is required at each stage to determine how long the creature has until the next stage begins. Stage 1. Incubation. If the creature received the infection from a wound, they will notice that nothing can be done to staunch the bleeding. The creature cannot regain hit points by any means. Stage 2 begins after 1d4 hours. Stage 2. Sickness. The creature begins to suffer from a fever and fatigue. They take a point of exhaustion and are considered poisoned. Stage 3 begins after 2d6 hours. Stage 3. Mania. The creature begins to behave erratically. At the start of each hour of Stage 3, the creature must make a DC 15 Wisdom saving throw. On a successful save, they are able to reason and act normally. On a failed save, they refuse to accept or acknowledge their infection, and intentionally seek out the safety of groups, heading towards population centres if they are travelling alone. Stage 4 begins after 1d8 hours. Stage 4. Death. The creature drops to 0 hit points and dies. Stage 5 begins after 1d10 minutes. Stage 5. Zombification. The corpse rises as a Nox zombie. Transmission. From Stage 2 onwards, an infected creature is contagious. Any other creature that comes into contact with an infected creature's blood, sweat, saliva, or other bodily fluid must succeed on a DC 8 Constitution saving throw, or be infected with the Nox virus. Identifying and curing the Nox virus. A creature can identify the presence of the Nox virus through a DC 13 Intelligence Medicine check. During stage 1, the virus can be cured through the use of a lesser restoration spell or similar magic. During stage 2, more powerful magic is required as the virus takes root in the creature's body. The greater restoration spell or similar magic is required to cure the virus. However, nothing short of a wish spell can cure the virus after it reaches stage 3. Additionally, any magic used to attempt to bring the creature back to life at stage 4 has no effect. Zombies of many forms. When a humanoid goes through zombification, they will usually become a normal Nox zombie, though on rare occasions a special mutation may occur. For non-humanoid creatures that go through this process, consult the Nox zombie template. So after a number of drafts and redrafts, that's where I've landed, trying to capture that idea of the zombie from popular media. But if you do want to use this in your game, feel free to adjust it as you see fit. These kinds of rules aren't going to work for everyone, as everyone will have their own idea of how they would like the infection to work in their campaign. As a small bonus, I've also drafted up a variant rule that I've called We're All Infected, clearly heavily inspired by The Walking Dead. This rules that everybody already has the airborne strand of the virus and they turn into zombies when they die, even if they didn't get bitten. So moving on to the Nox zombie that we talked about in that virus block. When somebody gets infected, assuming they're a regular humanoid, this is what they will become. Most of this stat block is very similar to the regular zombie from the monster manual with a few key changes. First off, I've put undead nature into the actual stat block. Usually this is just accompanying a monster in the flavor text on the side, but personally I prefer this to be in the stat block itself. I've also removed the ability for the zombie to understand languages, as I don't think that really fits the type of zombie that we're going for here. Then the big changes are to its actions. Your regular zombie just has a slam attack, which has a low to hit bonus and barely deals any damage. Our Nox zombie, on the other hand, has a grasp attack and the dreaded bite attack. The grasp does a little bit of damage, but it also grapples a target on a hit. Then, as a follow-up on their next turn, the zombie can use their bite. Note that they can only use the bite to target a creature they've already grappled. And for the bite, I wanted the DC to resist the infection to be pretty high. In TV, films and games, a bite is usually a death sentence. But I don't want it to be over as soon as the zombie closes in on the player. That's why it takes 2 rounds to wind up and actually use a bite attack. As long as the DM communicates the threat to the party, this should give them time to try and escape the grapple, for example, but it can still make groups of zombies particularly deadly, as if you get grappled by more than one at a time, you can only use your action to escape one of those grapples. I've tried to follow some core principles through this design process when it comes to building this homebrew, and that is not to start with the mechanics, but to start with the kind of fantasy you want to evoke and then design the rules around it. And it's always good to base on official material where we can in order to try and maintain that balance. To supplement our new basic Nox zombie, I've drawn up some rules for creating a Nox zombie for other creature types. Although you don't see it in all forms of zombie media, D&D is typically high fantasy, so I like to imagine zombie versions of other kinds of creatures, not just humans. So that's what these template rules are for. Let's run through them. Rather than just reading through the whole thing, I'll focus on the highlights. Their speed is reduced and their mental ability scores are altered to match the basic zombie. They lose most of their proficiencies but retain any resistances or immunities they had, in addition to gaining poison immunity. They lose their spellcasting trait if they had it, as they can no longer use items like spell components. However, they can keep innate spellcasting if they had it before. As their mental ability scores are now going to be rubbish, I've ruled that their new to hit bonus and spell save DC can be based on their constitution. A slightly controversial move in monster design, but I think it fits well here for the undead. Lastly, it gains the bite and grasp attack which the Nox zombie has, with scaling damage based on the creature's size. I've allowed grasp to be part of a multi-attack if the creature had that feature already, although the bite is always going to be a full action. Given the high DC to resist infection, which is an 18, I don't think it's really fair if a creature can go straight in and bite on the first round of combat. We don't want to wipe our party straight away. If you do decide to use this template or any of the Nox zombie variants in your game, I'd strongly recommend communicating the danger of the infection to the players through the narrative. Make sure they know how deadly the virus is before their first combat encounter. Maybe they see an NPC get infected and watch them go through that process and eventually turn. Or maybe you just have an NPC explain the virus to them and how it works. If they go in blind up against this kind of zombie and mistake them for a standard zombie or skeleton from the monster manual, they could lose a character just to one failed con save. That's not going to go down very well. You really need to give the players a chance to plan counter strategies for something as dangerous as this. To show these template rules in action for non-humanoid creatures, I've drawn up two examples. The classic owlbear, along with a slightly more complicated one using the cloud giant. Let's work through the cloud giant as our example here. Recalculating the challenge rating, this does actually bring the CR down by 2 from CR9 to CR7 as it is doing less damage now, although the payoff is that it has a chance to spread the virus. I intentionally chose the cloud giant as it was a creature that already had innate spellcasting, so it gets to retain that in its Nox zombie form. And the spells here could be really great and thematic for a zombie. I can imagine the Nox Cloud Giant using their telekinesis to bring their meals towards them to take a bite out of them, or maybe using gaseous form to bypass any barricades that the survivors may have put up to try and keep the zombies out. I won't go through each of these stat blocks line by line, but of course you can find them via the link below the video if you want to go through them yourselves. So that just gives a flavour of how we can make zombies a real threat into high tier play. A giant provides quite a good template for a high level monster that we can convert to a zombie. So let's continue down that road and go through a few other homebrew zombies I've created. I've made zombie horde stat blocks that operate like a swarm, and I've built some special infected. These are like the mutated zombies that you normally see in video games. Things like Left 4 Dead, Dying Light or State of Decay, for example. First up, let's take a look at the hordes. I've not done a large variant of the horde as that's just going to be about 4 zombies, which isn't hard to manage as a DM. However, what I have done is a huge horde and a gargantuan horde. As a DM, personally, I always like this idea of the players fighting off dozens of relatively weak enemies, as it gives the players a chance to show off some of their unique abilities on fodder. However, running large groups of foes can be quite cumbersome as the DM. Having, say, 10 or more creatures in initiative to manage can also make combat drag on and last a long time. While there are rules for handling mobs in the Dungeon Master's Guide, these involve making a calculation based on the monsters to hit bonus and the target's AC, and by the time you've run through that formula you may as well have just rolled all the dice to see if they hit anyway. From experience, I've found that the mob rules from the Dungeon Master's Guide don't actually save you a lot of time at the table. And that's why I've decided to go for swarms instead. I think that's the way to go, as you've just got one stat block then to manage as the DM. So here is what I've come up with. This one is the huge variant, a mob of zombies. Its armor class and speed are the same, but of course it's got a bigger pool of hit points. For ability scores, as a swarm it gets a bump to its strength and constitution, but its other scores stay the same. I've added in the swarm trait exactly as we would find it in the monster manual, and I've included the damage resistances and condition immunities that all the official swarm monsters are given. It also has a few unique traits. Endless Horde means that even when the swarm is technically defeated, some more straggler zombies are left behind. Overwhelming gives the swarm advantage on an attack if only one enemy is in range. This is reflective of their foe being literally swarmed by zombies. And then Mass of Bodies means that creatures that the mob moves into, like a stampede or a crowd rush, have to make a dex save or fall prone. On actions, it can make one attack against every creature within its reach. That is a grasping limbs attack on most of them, or a bite attack on any that are already grappled, just like our regular Nox zombie. I've also given it a simple mobility buff as a bonus action. This allows the mob to shuffle forwards another 5 feet if they scored a bite attack in that turn. Note that, just like other swarms from the monster manual, some of these abilities are dependent on the swarm still having more than half of its HP remaining. As I was designing this one, I was so tempted just to make an entirely new one-shot adventure just so I have a chance to run this thing. I think this would be really fun in a combat encounter. With its relatively low speed and low damage, it might not look like much on paper, but this thing will be lethal in the right circumstances. Between being able to knock characters prone, grapple them, and just envelop them in the swarm, if this thing catches up to you, you aren't walking away without a bite. And in actual play, I can see this as being a really good hazard, more so than just a monster to fight. The party's instinct is probably going to be correct if they try and flee from this thing, not fight it head on. And I also love the idea of the horde being a trap or environmental danger of some kind. Maybe there is a horde of zombies underneath the rickety rope bridge that the party are trying to cross, or there could be a fight on a high balcony and below the balcony is a horde of zombies, just waiting to devour anyone that falls off. And for the gargantuan version of the horde, everything is just amped up a little bit. Most of the features are very similar to the mob. This is the one you're going to want to use when you want to describe and show a city street just full of undead, shoulder to shoulder. Now, aside from some general upscaling, the other main changes to the Horde are that it makes 2 attacks on every creature in range, significantly increasing its lethality, as it can now potentially grapple and bite in the same turn. The overwhelming feature now applies even if 2 foes are within range, and when it gets defeated, it turns into 2 huge swarms. So this almost now becomes like a multi-phase boss, further reinforcing the idea that this is something the party should flee or avoid, rather than trying to stand their ground and take it down. Next, let's move on and take a look at some special mutated infected. This is a trope we see all across zombie media, but is most common in video games. I've broken down the special infected into 4 archetypes. The Stalker. This is a cunning and stealthy creature that strikes from the shadows, and usually has very good mobility. The Herald. This is a support type monster which attracts its fellow zombies towards any survivors, and usually has some kind of debuff it can apply to its foes. The Launcher. This is an undead variant that has some kind of ranged or thrown attack, usually striking from high ground. And then the Beast. This is the charging, aggressive ball of muscle that smashes through anything in its path. To highlight some of their key features, starting with the Stalker, this is a CR4 monster. It has a leap that can grapple and knock a target prone in the same bonus action if they fail a strength save. Let me know in the comments if you know what creature this move is inspired by. It'll be pretty obvious for some of you. Using its multi-attack, it can then make a flurry of claw attacks against a single target, gaining an extra strike on subsequent turns if it only targets that same creature. The Stalker's build is all about sustained damage to one target. As a reaction to taking damage, it can make another claw attack, but not necessarily a retaliatory attack against the attacker, but one against the creature it has grappled. Imagine party members trying to take this creature down as it pins one of their allies to the ground, but every time they hit it, it just gets more focused on that same target, hitting them over and over again. In terms of infectivity, it still has the bite to spread the virus, and I've also ruled that if it gets the killing blow with a claw attack, that can also transmit the Nox Virus to the victim. Next up is the Herald. This guy is smart for a zombie. He hides within the horde, not trying to stand out. Then, when the horde face an obstacle, maybe a blockade in the street or some natural barrier that the normal Nox zombies are too dumb to get past, the Herald then breaks off from the group to try and find a way around, a bit like a scout. And when it does so, it lets off a horrible shriek, attracting the horde to its location. I imagine this almost like the Herald sneaking around the back of a boarded up house trying to find the weak spot, and then calling the horde towards it to find a way in. In combat, it has some powerful debuff abilities it can use against its enemies, including a poisonous spray that slows targets down, allowing the other zombies to catch them up, and then its shriek attack, which can deafen and debilitate its foes. And to support its action economy a little bit, it has some bonus action and reaction options to improve its survivability. It can dodge as a bonus action, but only if it didn't make a melee attack in that turn. And as a reaction, it can grab a nearby zombie to use as a meat shield to potentially block an attack. Even though it doesn't deal out a lot of flat damage, this is a really strong support monster that has a lot of great synergy with the basic Nox zombies or the Nox zombie hordes. It can turn a basic zombie encounter from trivial to deadly. As such, I wouldn't recommend using more than say 2 of these in any encounter. They are backliners that the adventuring party should have to work their way through the horde to reach, or maybe use ranged attacks. They're not going to charge straight into combat, they're going to let the zombie masses do the work, while they sit back and use their special abilities. Next we have the launcher. This one is large in size as its hands and fingers have grown to an unnatural size, which it uses like catapults to throw projectiles. And speaking of projectiles, what it throws are organic blobs of congealed blood and bone which its body produces. And worse still, these blobs carry the Nox infection. So this is not only a creature which gives a ranged damage option to the undead, it can also infect creatures from range. You do not want to be caught out in the open without any cover if there is a launcher around, as they also favour high ground, rooftops and balconies. Then as a reaction, it has a simple block that it can use to protect itself from ranged attacks, giving it a small AC boost. And finally we have the Beast. When an infected person transforms into a beast, their muscles bulge and hair bursts forth all over their body. This is like a massive Yeti-like zombie, almost like a fur-covered Incredible Hulk. In combat, its role is your classic bruiser, tanky and hard-hitting. But a really notable feature here is its speed, 50 feet. Plus the Charger trait and the Siege Monster trait. This thing is basically an angry battering ram, and it can also recklessly attack like a raging barbarian. On its multi-attack, it can slam and thrash, knocking its foes all around the place, probably throwing them into hordes of regular zombies that are nearby. And if it wants to, it can replace one of its attacks with a grapple, lining itself up for a bite attack on another turn. But in practice, I see this monster purely as a damage dealer and disruptor, not so much as an infector. It's probably going to focus all of its actions on displacing and throwing the party around, dishing out shared damage across the group, rather than that single target focus like we saw with the Stalker, for example. And there we have it, a decent foundation to build your own zombie apocalypse type adventure, or maybe even an entire campaign. This one took a lot of work to pull together to design the monsters and to balance all of the stat blocks, so I really hope you guys enjoyed this one. Let me know in the comments what you think about these zombies and what would you change if you were going to introduce this in your game. I can't wait to spend some more time testing these out myself. In fact, I think my next project is going to be to design a zombie horror survival one-shot. As always, you can find the link below to Reddit where you can get a hold of all of this stuff to use in your own game. And if you want to see more of this kind of content, please remember to hit that like button and to subscribe to the channel, Nazir North. And maybe check out some of my other videos on the end screen. Cheers everyone, thank you for watching, I will see you next time.